welcome to Roll of a Tangent, episode 44. My name is Nikita Zuev, and tonight I am once again joined by my co hosts, Robert Gibson and XJ. Tonight's tale was randomly selected by a literal roll of a die. We're trying a new format for our discussion, examining a story from the extensive library of the Weird Tales magazine, aiming to look at something neither or either of us have read before. Our first delve has surfaced this extraordinary yarn, as the Weird Tales itself proclaims, The Ghoul and the Corpse, published in March 1923, in the very first issue of the aforesaid magazine. Here is the summary. The story is quite, short. It's available in many different places online. Maybe we'll also make the PDF I made for it available somewhere too, so you could read it the way we've read it. But regardless, here it goes. Here's the summary. This is your last chance to click away. Set in the early 1920s Alaska, our tale begins with a rather grouchy and xenophobic fur dealer, MacNeal, who assures us that we are about to read a lie as he disassociates himself from the authorship of the account. Instead, that honor belongs to Chris Bonner, a longtime acquaintance of the storyteller. Mr. Bonner enters our narrative rather quickly, famished and tired from a long journey. He seems to yearn for the comforts of civilization, as if deprived of them for a considerable amount of time. When his hunger is satisfied, he begins speaking of strange things, tipping Earth theory, which proposes that the equator shifted in the past, creating a cold snap that froze the world. MacNeal is startled by such talk, as well as the clear, disheveled state of his guest. Finally, Bonner reveals an artefact he has brought with him, a mastodon ivory knife covered in caked blood of a more recent nature. From then, most of the narrative consists of Bonner recounting the strange happenstance of this discovery, a scientific treasure he found while seeking material ones. In a crystal clear ice, at considerable depth, was a corpse of a perfectly preserved human, and not just some ordinary victim. A prehistoric being, one that walked the earth thousands of years ago. The perilous labor of unearthing such a precious finding had the undesirable outcome of making Bonner sick. For days he was delirious, imagining the animal man grinning at him as Bonner's body fought for warmth and comfort. Once the fog of illness cleared, Bonner could not stand to have the creature's visage around him any more. So strange were his visions. It was then he decided to thaw out the creature by the fire. Unbeknownst to the prospector himself, the decision created a chain reaction. What was once a corpse was now reanimated into a ghoulish apparition of the past. After a desperate struggle against the beast that ended in a great flame, Bonner is left with but the souvenir which he presented earlier and a long track towards the civilization. Had he been delirious? Did he create this creature in his mind? Did it come to life? And if it was all just a fairy tale, where did the knife come from? There you go. That is the tale that we have read. I think we're gonna go around the table and see how everyone felt. XJ, we'll start with you. How did you feel about the ghoul and the corpse?
Actually, I would much rather hear from the two of you first. Especially you, Nikki, because you said you have a lot to say about this, right?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I am more curious about what you guys have to say than I actually have any for myself, so to speak. I don't know if that came across, if that made sense. Yeah, but more interested in what
Yeah.
you guys have to say. Yeah,
Sure, I'll start if
yeah.
that's all right, Robert. Sure. So The Ghoul and the Corpse, I think, is written in a very interesting way. It is written quite similar to The Devil's Daughter, actually, because it is one big dialogue of a man recounting something. And there is this large emphasis on the strange. Now, I think the tale overdoes it a little bit in its zealousy. It talks about this creature in many ways, and some of it is good foreshadowing, and others, a bit pulled out of a hat a little bit. But um, that doesn't detract from it too much. There is this beautiful charm about this tale for me, especially because it was literally written 100 years ago, and it puts me into the feeling of sitting down and enjoying it as a fiction from that era, right? So I prepared myself. I got myself situated. I didn't know if the story was going to be a good or bad, right? We have this new format where the tale we're talking about, we have no idea if it's good or bad. What's the contents of the tale, which I find rather exciting when all three of us have no idea what's within. It's like a mystery box. It could be terrible. It could be great. Who knows? But regardless, I knew that it came from an old magazine. So I made myself a cup of tea, which I did for today as well. I, you know, relaxed on a recliner chair. I poured myself a little bit of whiskey to maybe get some of the rawness from it if the tail desired it. And I mean, there were a couple of times when I did grab the um, that glass, I will say. Um, and yeah, I just tried to immerse myself. I went on YouTube and I found a video which was the sound of an endless tundra. There we go. That's the name. Tundra, right? Like so, like whistling of wind and howling of snow. As soon as I realized that was happening in Alaska, I was like, okay, cool. I'll put that on. Put my headphones on, and I read it on my iPad, sort of imagining it to be a magazine of sorts. I wanted to print it out, but I don't have a printer at home, unfortunately. That will change, but in this instance, I didn't have it in anything but my iPad. And let me tell you, setting everything up and all of this atmosphere that I created for myself greatly expanded my enjoyment of the tale. And it got me into thinking of something. I'll talk about the story itself in a second, but actually getting yourself in the mood and doing all these things before you read a tale um, seem to have enhanced my way of reading so much that I did it for the previously discussed on a previous podcast, The Witcher, as well, and it also enhanced the reading of the tale. I found some Witcher music. I got myself situated. I switched to combat music of the Witcher 3 when the Striga fight was going on, and so on and so forth. Right, I got myself into the dimension, and it really really does help. Um, so now I understand why my grandfather had in his library um, oh man, I'm not a record player. There we go. That's what it's called in English. A record player, and he would have several records that he would play for different tales or stories that he would read, and setting up the mood and sort. I'd never understood it until I tried it myself. And yeah, it really, it is of great benefit. As far as the tale itself concerns, it is of its time in a sense of the sensibilities of the individuals, which is fine. I mean, you can't take it away. That is how it was written. Um, it doesn't detract from the fiction itself much, um, because it's very sparse and very far and few between. Unlike stuff in H.P. Lovecraft's work, for example. And there was this great sense of discovery that I felt. Um, I felt this kinship with Bonner, that something is happening and things are transpiring and there's this excitement, and he, the way it's written, I could hear his voice, his way, his accent, and that really added to the enjoyment of the tale for me as well. So with all of those things combined, it left a very good impression on me. I'll be a bit more in depth when we get into the discussion proper, but that is it for now from me. Robert,
Mm.
what about you?
I've got quite a bit to say about the story, but I'd like to just start off by an interesting thing that occurred to me just now, actually, just while this discussion is going on, and that is that it's not at all definitely clear, in my view, whether it's science fiction or fantasy. And this thing about people thawing out is perhaps acceptable um, in a sort of uh, the sort of science fiction that one has to be very tolerant about when reading. It's much more plausible in H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, because in that case, the things that are thawing out are nowhere near human and far, far tougher than anything in the animal kingdom or vegetable kingdom that we know of. So you can imagine them being frozen for hundreds of thousands of years and then thawing out. But as for this one, I'd say it's very borderline. That doesn't matter. It doesn't spoil my enjoyment of the story, really. But it does mean that I have to put my suspension of disbelief into slightly higher gear, if you like. I have to sort of pump it up a bit while reading about this proto-human thawing out. That's one sort of comparison. It's a sort of story that brings out lots of comparison with other stories. The idea of the Earth tipping over makes me immediately think of the huge 700-page novel The Hab Theory by a chap called Eckert, who goes into this in great detail.
Hmm.
And what else? The reliance on very successful reliance on uh, dialogue, on monologue mostly, telling the story is reminds me of another tale we did on Roll Off a Tangent, namely A Martian Odyssey by Stanley Weinbaum, which is also
Yeah.
entirely a flashback narration.
You know
Um,
what? I actually find the jibs from MacNeal that are very occasional but do happen. That sort of like take you back to the idea that this is happening as a monologue, as a recounting,
yeah,
quite well spaced in the tale,
hmm, yeah, I
right?
agree. Yeah. One little query I have is to do with the title of the story. Why is it called The Ghoul and the Corpse? As though we were talking about two different people.
I thought it was because the so this is my theory, right? I thought that it was like because we first saw this apparition as just the corpse, and then it became a ghoul when it has become alive, right? So
Right.
it's the
I had a much different interpretation.
oh, okay.
I
What is
thought
your
the
reason?
goo was referring to the what's his name, the miner, the guy who's prospecting for gold,
Bonner.
Bonner. I thought the goo referred to him
Hmm.
because
It's a bit harsh,
he's
though.
basically a grave robber.
He is a grave robber. It's true.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, if it was called, it should have been called the grave robber and the corpse. That would have been.
I mean, so at the end when I finished reading the story, the first thought, the thought that sprang to my mind was when with the title, the goo and the corpse. Who is the goo and who is the corpse? That was my thought.
Hmm.
Anyway, please
Hmm.
continue, Robert.
One more point to make, and that is that I have, and that is about the simplicity of the story. I like the linear simplicity of just talking about how you find this thing and it thaws out and it wakes up, and that's really all that there is to it. I like that because it focuses on the telling of the story and not on any gimmickry to do with the plot. However, having said that, I just wonder maybe if it's just little smidgen too simple. I would like to know more about it, really. Don't know if you people feel the same way. I'd like to know a bit
Uh,
more of the background.
we the people agree. I think that is one of the things that's missing from the tale is the expansion. Now I do understand it was written for a magazine with probably a limited amount of letters and words that the author could submit. So that is perhaps something that could be the thing here. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I don't really know why they didn't go into this exploration. To me, this strikes neither science fiction nor fantasy. This strikes to me as a horror story, right? Because you have
Right.
to also, yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say, Robert?
No, yeah, I just class horror stories as either fancy horror
Ah, I
stories or
see, I
science
see, I see.
fiction
You have a
horror.
further
I
specification.
didn't
Yeah,
think of them as a category in them on its own sort of thing.
I think. Well, there's very different horror stories. You could have a horror story that's very you know, you could have a horror story that doesn't use any element from either fantasy or science fiction, right? They could be very non-fictiony in their ways, right? Some horror
Mm.
uh, can be like, for example, the slasher movies.
Jack,
A lot of them.
is it Friday the 13th or the other one? Oh, Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th is with Jason Voorhees, the
Yeah,
guy
yeah,
with the
yeah.
mask, with the
He's
hockey mask.
yeah. There's no supernatural elements in that, right?
Well, I mean, in the first, well, he is an animated corpse.
Fair enough. Okay.
So, but okay, if you look at something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? The only quote unquote supernatural element um, in that story is that these people haven't been found out because they're like have killed so many other individuals. That's the only supernatural aspect of it, right? Is the fact that they keep getting away with this horrible shit that they do. Otherwise they're just serial killers, right? So you
Mm.
could have you could have horror that has neither science fiction nor fantasy within it.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
anyway,
hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
but it's
Mm.
all right. That's not what we're talking about. The horror elements of it, however, I feel could use some tuning, could use some work. Like it maybe this is because of my modern sensibilities, because I can't put myself 100 years in the past reading this tale, may probably never hearing about the prehistoric man and how they looked like, because the very first description of the creature when he flops the corpse on its side to see the face. That was very effective, but and that was kind of horrific the way it was described in the tale. But the second encounter with it was borderline comedic, you know, until they started to try and kill him. Then it wasn't so funny. But it sort of like jerking
Mm.
its leg and moving around a little bit. It wasn't that like it could have been described better to evoke a more horrific situation. I think you know what I mean, right?
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So, XJ, tell us
Um.
what is it? What is it that you have to say?
Yeah. So the story didn't work for me at all. It didn't.
Big surprise.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it didn't work for me as a science fiction. It didn't really work for me as fantasy, and I did not even really it. At the back of my mind, I thought maybe this is a horror story, but um, it also didn't evoke any horror elements in me. Uh, I said in a previous episode that I have once my suspension of disbelief, which Rob has touched on, gets shattered. I stop. It's very hard for me to get back into the zone of seeing the story as it is. So the thing that thoroughly shattered the suspension of disbelief is the cryogenic freezing and thawing. Man, it just doesn't work like that.
No. No.
I
No,
mean,
it doesn't. That's very true.
it's like
Mm.
it's like it's like well, I'm not gonna go into the science, you know,
Cell,
but
cell rupture, yeah.
yeah, cell rupture exactly because
The
water
ice crystals,
water
right, forming.
water shrink contracts when it gets to around 4 degrees, and then it suddenly expands again, which will rupture or cellular walls. And so the only creature I know of in my limited knowledge that actually can survive this cryogenic thawing is our tardigrades, which are very simple creatures, water bears.
Mm. Well,
So
that's probably why the creature was so annoyed because his cells were all ruptured.
could be. Anyway, yeah. So that the other thing that made me like just not so sure about where the direction of the story was going was the tilting of the Earth changing its axis. So my
Mm.
science on that was not is not exactly, I'm not fully clear on that, but I don't think it works that way.
No,
Like
no.
the like when if we are talking about a change in the tilt of the Earth's axis, we're talking about huge magnetic shift in a
Mm.
huge shift in the magnetic zone of the Earth as well, and that would have severe consequences on everything on Earth.
Yeah,
Like we
that
do,
does happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
we do know that the Antarctic at the was it the Antarctic or is it the Arctic? The and one of the poles anyway was at some point had fertile ground, but that was because of
Continental drift.
not
Yeah.
well continental drift, but also I think there were points in time on Earth where it was way warmer and would have
Mm.
melted the polar ice caps and stuff like that. And so
Mm.
other parts of the Earth would have been under ocean and stuff like that. So it wasn't because of the tilt of the Earth, and that started my bell ringing. And then once I got to the cryogenic freeze, I'm like, yeah, I can't
Mm.
do this story as science fiction, which then leaves it as horror. And like Nikki pointed out, the first part of flopping the body over was okay, but then the the second part was just like, what are we? What is this, man? Yeah.
Mm.
Having said
You
all,
didn't.
sorry,
Yeah.
no,
No, go on,
please.
go on.
So having said all that, I agree with Nikki. Again, incredible that this is a campfire story. As in, we all sit around a campfire and we start talking about it, right? I classify them as campfire stories, which is kind of like
Mm.
that is the devil's daughter. Um, and I think did get a sense, I did get a very strong sense of early American writing from this short story as well, like way back in that during that time about prospecting, and it's very Jack London-y, so to speak.
Yeah.
Uh, the White
The
Wolf.
thing I wanted to say was, so you didn't get enjoyment out of the how do I say this, the charm of the tale being so simplistic, like it that wasn't something that you were enjoying.
Um, it's I yeah, not really. Like I said, once my suspension of disbelief is shattered, it's very hard for me to further treat the story as a story.
I
That's
think
just the
I'm
way it
beginning to
goes.
understand why you like fantasy so much, because
Because
there's
there's
very little chance of shattering the suspension
exactly
of disbelief.
exactly.
Mm.
It's like Conan, he's just a big muscle guy going around smashing heads. Very simple, very yeah, entertaining. Nothing complicated behind that. But once we start bringing things like this into the picture, then I will treat it with that kind of respect. And if it doesn't hold itself up to a standard, then yeah, that's how it is.
Mm.
I get a feeling you gotta do a lot of these, like, oh, this science doesn't make any sense, when once we start reviewing some of the later versions of this magazine because there is a lot. There's like a period of time where most of the tales are basically science fiction or weird science stories, and then none of them will hold up to your scrutiny.
It's not one to one. Uh, it, it's like there are some really old science fiction stories that I can accept, and like Clark Ashton Smith, for instance, the one that we just talked about, and also the one that we just talked about, the Martian Odyssey or something like that.
Yeah.
The Venus thing,
The immeasurable horror.
the immeasurable horror. Like we
immeasurable horror.
we all know Venus is not capable of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the much older, some of the very much older, like the C.S. Lewis Out of the Silent Planet, that is also like completely how do you get from one planet to the other through like portal or what? That's just not how it works, right? But within but I don't read those as science fiction. And I wanted and I wanted to read this as horror. I wanted to read this particular story as horror, but it's the second thing, the second so the second part where the guy actually, the proto-human actually thawed out, and then he meets face to face with Bonner, and then they had that tussle.
The confrontation.
The confrontation. That part was like you said, it's comedic. Yeah. So I could not read it as horror either. That's
I found its stumblings charming, as you found them like as proof that the story had no quality, right? Which is interesting, right? For some reason my the way I came towards this tale, I was like, all right, we got to be real nice to this one. It's 1923. It's an unknown author. Oh my God! You can actually read this and the story makes sense. Holy moly! Am I impressed? Oh, that's cute. Ooh, that is a little horrific tale. Ooh, yeah, not bad. Not bad. I was as Robert said about The Witcher. I was pleasantly surprised that this tale wasn't completely terrible.
I mean, I would agree with you. It's not completely terrible. It's not Snows of Kilimanjaro.
I mean, nothing is Snows of Kilimanjaro. Let us put it that way.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, huh?
I mean, man. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't have paid for the story.
Well, all right. What I want to say to you is this. I am astounded. So dear viewers, I created this system which goes through like an entire issue of weird tales, takes every story that is there and every essay and stuff, but then I cut out the essays later on because I read one of them and I'm like, I'm not interested in this. So it's just the short novellas and short stories that are within the magazine. We could, if we just did the entirety of issue 1, we would have 16 episodes. Like there is so much packed into the magazine. I'm almost wondering if we should do 2 tales per magazine and not just one random one, because there is so much inside it. It's crazy. It's like you were buying an entire book for 25 cents. Yeah, some of the stories wouldn't be that great, but
I mean, fair enough. Like that's what I said. It's like if it's something that came packaged with something else, sure, I'll give it a read. But it's like one of those things, right? Like there are movies that I would watch on a plane, but I would never pay to go into a cinema to watch.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you
Yeah,
mean.
that's what I
But
mean.
yeah, for sure. I understood
Mm.
your point. It's just to me it was rather crazy that at some point for 25 cents you could buy like a novel.
Yeah.
And now if I want to buy a short story, a collection of short stories is like 12 euros for me, you know.
Yeah,
Mm.
paperbacks expensive, man, these days. But
Mm.
it's kind of like having a Netflix subscription, right? It's the equivalent.
Mm.
You pay like $16
Oh,
or something, and then you get like
Mm.
you mean the Weird Tales magazine? Yeah. No, it is even crazy because the Weird Tales magazine is not the only one. There's like the Adventure, the Astonishing Tales, and blah blah blah. There's so many of them, and each of them were released once a month, and each of them had like, man, so much content in them. It's crazy.
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have pretty much said all I can say about the goo and the cops. Really, do you guys have anything else you want to add?
I would just say it's heartening that a random sample of an issue of that magazine should turn up something that's quite well written.
Yeah.
That's true.
Uh,
That's true.
mm.
As far as the author, I tried to look into it. The author themselves concerned, they did submit other works that would many different works to other magazines and stuff, mostly westerns. But their actual identity was never, or never revealed. I'm not sure if it was a woman or a man. You know,
Mm.
J.A. Wells. That's all we have.
Right.
So it's quite interesting. It is a bit of a mystery author. Um,
Mm.
I mean, we have to bring the beautiful section of sequelitis back, right? Let's see if we can come up with a sequel to this tale. And I'll do my part, and then I'll see if any of my colleagues have bothered to use their brain. We'll find out in a couple of minutes. All right. So here is my uh, sequel to the Ghoul and the Corpse. It's called the Corpse and the Ghoul. No, okay.
That's a
It doesn't
great
really matter.
example of using your brain, Nikki.
I do sometimes. It's very hard. There's not much in there. So the tale would actually begin in the prehistoric times, and it would begin with the village of this creature that we saw die, and they would be going into the caverns below to to fight a different tribe. And once they're having this tussle and this fight, most of the assailants from both sides get killed, and we find out that the thing that those creatures were protecting, this ancient brew, this ancient primordial soup, the remnants of the thing that gave birth to the entirety of all creatures and all the DNA that exists in all of beings, because it has this sort of great fantastical property where it could heal anybody in any way. Well, it's sort of like those cells, those stem cells, right? That they can replicate anything, but it can do that to any creature exponentially. And as the main hero is about to go get this stuff for an undisclosed reason, but let's make him sympathetic. He's getting it for his son to rid him of a tail. One of the people on the opposite side turns out to be not dead, and they have a tussle, and our hero falls into this primordial soup and changes. And that's when we come back to the real world, where the ashes on the ground of the hut that was burnt slowly come together and the thing becomes living again. And it starts a rampage in Alaska. And part two is all about this investigator who comes in, who talks about this weird man who looks like a prehistoric abomination albino that is like, you know, creating a menace to society in Alaska. And then he meets with Bonner, who has gone insane, because she's like, I told everyone that this thing existed. Um, and yeah, the third act would be like, how do we deal with this monster that can't even be killed with flame? There you go. That's my sequel to the Ghoul and the Corpse.
Well.
Reminds me a little bit of the Dunwich horror. The confrontation with a primordial soup guy.
I mean, it would be in the, like in the shape of a caveman.
It's a bit creepy tales, tales from the crypt kind of vibe, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you gotta do something with the concept.
But it is in keeping with the tone of the actual story itself. So
For sure. Yeah,
it's not bad.
it's very hard to write a sequel to a story that has a very definitive ending. So I had to.
Yeah. So what about you, Rob? What ideas do you have for?
Yeah, I think that the chap what's he called, MacNeal.
The guy who is telling the story, or the guy who's being told the story.
It's being told to.
Yeah, that's MacNeal.
Yeah, he doesn't believe any of it, and he goes back to his home in wherever it is, some hot place, Arizona or whatever, and he thinks how stupid the whole story was, and then suddenly the equator tips over again because it's time for it to happen again, and the next thing you know, Arizona's at the North Pole and it's freezing cold, and he's fallen into a crevasse and he's frozen, and then he's left there, presumably for somebody else to dig up, like the last primitive guy was dug up. So
that's very inventive. Very inventive. I like it.
Full circle.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Very inventive. I like it. Yeah.
The only thing is, I don't know why the equator should tip up like this.
Some giant hamster was pushing it at the other end of the earth. No.
Yeah, somewhere in Vladivostok. What about you, actually? Do you have
my submission is a lot more shall we say mundane compared to the offerings by my two colleagues. I thought that a pretty decent way to do a sequel would be to treat it a little bit like the Lost World, the one by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is because the story starts with a press release talking about some creature that some professor had found, and then the rest of the story is an expedition to the plateau that's loosely based on the one that's found in Bolivia. And so my submission would be, Bonner takes his story to the press. Some rich dude with too much money decided to take an interest, and then funds an expedition to somewhere, and finds a cave full of frozen proto-humans or something like that. That's my submission. Okay. It's very mundane. Very mundane compared to the Earth tilting again, I must say, or a primordial soup. Yeah, being dunked into the FEV, forced evolutionary virus vat. Yeah, Fallout.
But it does warm my heart to see both of you attempt coming up with a sequel to a tale. I think this is the first time when all three of us have submitted an idea. Keep it up, folks. I'm very impressed.
Don't rely on me. I'm pretty lazy, so
do your best. I mean, you are correct, but it is nice to be surprised.
Oh, thanks for
So-
agreeing with me, bro.
What do you? No, this is like every conversation I ever have with the opposite sex. You're like, isn't that what you wanted? Did I agree with you? No, not this time. All right.
All right.
So thank you guys for watching today's podcast. Let us know if you enjoyed the new format of us talking about a tale that none of us read before. And yeah, like and subscribe. Thank you very much for coming.
Have a nice day, guys.
Take care.